Well, according to multiple reports, an initial decision on the Deshaun Watson case could be handed down sometime this week. Legal briefs are due to be submitted to Judge Sue L. Robinson sometime Monday. The NFL has reportedly been pushing for an indefinite suspension, while the NFLPA has been pursuing a more lenient punishment or none at all. And let's welcome in CBS Sports NFL writers Wilson and Tyler Sullivan. Guys, I think we're all expecting Watson to be facing some kind of suspension. So the Browns are going to be planning for every possibility right now. Ryan, what options are available to Kevin Stefanski and company?
Yeah, you mentioned, Russ, that they're planning for every eventuality. It makes you wonder if perhaps they'd like a time machine and go back and just scrap this whole Deshaun Watson trade altogether. But here we are, no time machine as we sit here. So they have Jacoby Brissett, who's 29 years old, who played previously for the Dolphins and part-time duty last year for Tua. He's played for other teams, including the Patriots and the Colts. And look, he is the epitome of a backup, but he also has a winning record over the course of his career. He has a positive touchdown-interception ratio, 37-19, and that means he doesn't turn the ball over. You see the win-loss there, 14-23. That doesn't necessarily blow your hair back. But again, he was brought in as a breaking case of emergency situation, and as you noted, Russ, we're going to find out very shortly what this Deshaun Watson suspension is going to look like and for how long. I think there are worse options than Jacoby Brissett. Clearly, the Browns like him. They like him better, obviously, than Baker Mayfield. And Plan C, and you hope you don't get to that, is Josh Dobbs, who was originally drafted by the Steelers out of Tennessee. He's been a journeyman, mostly a number 3, and if he has to play, then it would probably feel like the season's lost for the Browns. I think what the Browns are hoping for is that, okay, you roll with Jacoby Brissett. Best case scenario, maybe you have Jacoby for 6 to 8 games, and then you get Deshaun Watson back. If he can keep things afloat, go 500, Deshaun Watson can come back and help make that late push to win the division or at least have a playoff spot. But again, we have no idea what the suspension is going to look like. So it could be the case very easily that Jacoby Brissett ends up playing all 17 games.
Yeah, and to piggyback off Ryan there, Jacoby Brissett is kind of the perfect quarterback to be in a situation like this, because basically from the jump in his career, he's been thrust into weird situations. You go back to his rookie year in New England, Tom Brady was suspended for the first 4 games due to Deflategate. Jimmy Garoppolo was supposed to start. He gets hurt in week 2. All of a sudden, as a rookie, he's playing in the NFL. He's helping the Patriots get to a 3-1 record over the course of that Brady suspension. And then you fast forward a few years later, he's the backup when Andrew Luck decides to shock the NFL and retire, and he's starting for that whole season for Indianapolis. So he is no stranger to these quirky situations of, not expecting to be the starter, and then all of a sudden you look up and you're starting week 1 for a team in the NFL. So Jacoby Brissett has the pedigree to do that more than I think any other quarterback in the NFL. And now if Deshaun Watson gets a year-long suspension, what the NFL is recommending there, the indefinite for the year-long suspension, well, then maybe Cleveland looks elsewhere outside of the organization. Maybe they were only looking at Jacoby Brissett as a stopgap type of guy. And there are quarterbacks available. Jimmy Garoppolo, we still don't know what's going to happen there in San Francisco. There are reports today that he is still on schedule in his recovery from offseason shoulder surgery. He'll need to pass a physical to facilitate any sort of trade, so we're still a little bit of ways from there. But he would be someone who would continue to raise the ceiling for Cleveland in their offense, so he would be someone to obviously pay attention to. And the other one, you look at Sam Darnold in Carolina. Obviously, they just traded for Baker Mayfield. It looks like he's going to be the week 1 starter for the Panthers. Is all of a sudden Sam Darnold now available? Is he someone that could give you a better chance to win over Jacoby Brissett? That's something that the Cleveland brass will have to figure out there. But there are some options outside of the organization. If they keep it in-house, Brissett has a rare trait and ability to kind of come in these weird situations.
All right, Ryan, coming back to you again. Lamar Jackson wants a new deal from the Ravens, and nothing much seems to be happening or even leaking for that matter about that. But he also doesn't seem to be all that bothered by the uncertainty. In fact, he's put on about 15 pounds of muscle this offseason. How do you see this playing out in Baltimore?
Yeah, much like Lamar Jackson, I put on 15 pounds, not of muscle, unfortunately, so I need to get in a Lamar Jackson workout plan. But I think you sort of touched on it, Russ. He is not bothered, and I think this thing is going to work out. And Sully and I talked about this a few weeks ago. This is not anything close to the Kyler Murray situation in Arizona, where he took his team's name off his social media as a form of pouting, I guess, for someone in their early 20s. Seems sort of weird to me, but I'm old. Lamar Jackson He put something on social media that says he needs money. He said he wasn't even making a big deal out of it, more of a joke. I think that's the case. And look, he's his own agent. So the Ravens have actually said, we're trying to get in touch with Lamar. It hasn't been as easy as we had hoped. We want to talk contract. Lamar said he hopes to get this deal done by training camp. He has no intentions of holding out. I take him at his word, and I take the Ravens at their word. And you think about it this way. Could Lamar make more money on the open market? Should things go in that direction? Yeah, probably, but I don't think the Ravens want to reset their quarterback situation when you have one of the 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in the NFL right there in your building. Just pay him, and the more you wait, and much the same way that Jerry Jones waited on Dak Prescott for about 18 months, the more you get to pay the quarterback. So you can save yourself $5, $6, $7 million if you pay Lamar now as opposed to waiting 12 to 18 months into the future. So I think this thing works out. I just think it gives us something to talk about in mid-July here. I don't think this is going to be anything other than a discussion that we have at the end of August where we're talking about Lamar just got that new shiny deal worth every penny of it.
The number one thing in contract negotiations is leverage. You try to create it any sort of way that you can. And Lamar Jackson, I think, is playing this pretty well if he wants to cash in. I mean, we are waiting for Kyler Murray to maybe ink a new contract. If that happens, like Ryan was saying, that's just going to balloon Lamar Jackson's price even higher for the Baltimore Ravens. And also, going back to the 15 pounds of muscle, I think that this is something that, again, is creating leverage for Lamar Jackson. He was limited to 12 games last year. He had COVID, during training camp going into the year. And obviously that ankle injury kind of derailed the second half for him and really hobbled him for the first, for the last couple of weeks there for the Ravens, and ultimately he missed out on the playoffs. I think that could be something, a sort of motivation here for him to get bulkier, for him to get bigger, for him to continue to take that type of abuse. Being a quarterback that runs more than any other in the NFL, you get a little bulkier, you get a little bigger. Again, you can be able to handle that. And if the Ravens are going to the negotiating table saying, hey, listen, we don't know if we want to give you this big money contract because you play a style that could contribute to you getting injured, like you just missed, over limited to 12 games last year, that could be something that's put against him. I think that he's trying to create leverage for himself to say, hey, listen, I can make it through a full season healthy. I can still play at my ability at being one of the fastest and one of the more run-dominant quarterbacks in the NFL, and health isn't a problem. So if all of a sudden he puts on this muscle, plays 17 games, and is Lamar Jackson, again, that injury narrative is completely out the window there. More leverage for Lamar in these negotiations.
Now let's keep talking about quarterbacks because that's what we do in July and August and September and October and November. Tyler, the script appears to have been flipped with regards to the way people are talking about Trey Lance in San Francisco. First was why did they draft this guy with Jimmy G on the roster? Then it was he's not ready. And now it's all rainbows and butterflies and big expectations. I mean, what is going on with the Niners and Trey Lance?
Yeah, and you get all the cliches, too, of every, second-year quarterback. He's gained his voice. He has a better command of everything that's going on. And, that's all to be expected. But when we look at these young quarterbacks, the number one thing is, what is the situation around them? How is that going to help or hurt their development? I mean, you saw last year in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence, a generational kind of quarterback to come into the NFL. But when he's in a dysfunctional situation like he was with Urban Meyer as his head coach, things are going to go off the rails pretty quickly. I mean, if you look at Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, that pairing obviously was fantastic. So it really is a huge piece to this narrative of the situation around Trey Lance. Ryan can speak more about, obviously, the prospect and how that was coming into the NFL. Didn't play a lot at North Dakota State, obviously. Didn't play a ton last year because of Garoppolo. But the situation around him is as good as any other place in the NFL. Good coaching staff with Kyle Shanahan. They run that wide zone running scheme that will help him move the chains without him throwing the football. A defense that's top-notch when they're healthy. And he has 2 premier weapons at key positions, and George Kittle at the tight end spot and Deebo Samuel at wide receiver. Everything around Trey Lance makes sense. It looks like it's stable. It's not a Sam Darnold going to New York and it's just a bleep show of, what's going to happen next with the New York Jets. The San Francisco 49ers are a blue chip organization and they have a Super Bowl roster around him. There's already going to be pressure for him because they traded all those draft picks, and obviously he's replacing a guy in Jimmy Garoppolo that took this team to the Super Bowl not that long ago. But everything around him outside of his play is sound.
By the way, Sully, Sam Darnold took that bleep show from New York to Carolina, so I got a good chuckle when you mentioned that perhaps he's an answer in Cleveland if things go sideways there. God help the Browns if Sam Darnold's the answer in Cleveland, because things have gone more Brownsy than we could have ever imagined. But you're exactly right, and maybe the most important thing that Trey Lance has going for him is Kyle Shanahan. He could have average receivers and running backs, average offensive line, but Kyle Shanahan dialing up the plays can go a long way. We've seen Kyle Shanahan have success in Cleveland. In Washington with RG3 early in his career, he was sort of a rising star until the injuries caught up with him. And I think Trey Lance, on that San Francisco roster that you noted, is pretty much stacked offensively, has a chance to be really good defensively if they're healthy. The issue is they're playing in that division, and that'll be incredibly difficult. But there's a reason that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch wanted Trey Lance at number 3 overall, why they traded up for him. And now the question becomes, how does this work out in terms of the compensation or what they had to give up to get Trey Lance, and how quickly he can assimilate into what Kyle Shanahan wants? We talk about the cliches and joke there, but this is year 2 in Kyle Shanahan's system, so it's going to have to be run not necessarily flawlessly, but much better than what we saw last year from the glimpses we got out of Trey Lance, and the expectations were certainly those in which we didn't expect a lot from him. But Jimmy G is now clearly the number 2, maybe elsewhere by the time September gets here, and this is Trey Lance's show. So the good news is in that Kyle Shanahan offense, the running game is incredibly important. The other good news is if you understand this offense, guys will be open. You just have to get them the ball and get them the ball quickly. And he adds the added benefit of using his feet, something that Kyle Shanahan didn't have with Matt Ryan, something that he didn't have with Jimmy G. And this is a new element that clearly he wanted in that offense. And I think this is, if not best case scenario, that's probably Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. It's not a bad consolation prize if you're a young quarterback going to play for someone dialing up plays like Kyle Shanahan.
Speaking in the division in year 2, you got Matthew Stafford, Ryan. He won the Super Bowl in his first year with the Rams. Now he says he's even more comfortable in the offense, which I guess kind of makes sense. It's also a scary proposition for opposing defenses for sure. I'd also argue that that kind of proclamation puts even more pressure on the defending champs. What do you think?
I think it does, Russ. The great news for the Rams is that they play in a conference where there's not a lot of competition. We talked about San Francisco. Are they better than the Rams? Not on paper. We know about the Packers and Aaron Rodgers. How much longer is he going to play? Will that be a distraction? Even if he's full tilt, I think still the Rams are a better team top to bottom. We know they lost Devontae Adams in Green Bay. And then the NFC East is the NFC East. So you have concerns there. I think that Matthew Stafford making those comments should be a warning sign to the rest of the NFC that he wasn't actually at 100% operational capacity, to borrow a Star Wars Death Star term there, and he's going to be ready to go. We talked about Kyle Shanahan. We got Sean McVay, who is also a genius in his own right in terms of dialing up plays, and he doesn't have a second-year quarterback. He has a veteran quarterback that, if you talk to my buddy Will Brinson, host of the Pick Six podcast, thinks is going to be a Hall of Famer. We'll see if that plays out. But this is a guy that showed up in year 1, got the offense, had guys like Cooper Kupp at his disposal, and went absolutely off. The offensive line will have a chance to improve. They lost some veterans there to retirement. That running game is going to be as good, if not better, than it was last year. They added Kyron Williams out of Notre Dame. I think he's going to be an interesting piece. And again, we haven't talked about this yet. They don't care about draft picks. So they just sign guys. They worry about the salary cap later, and they just win football games. And that's a strategy that works if you get the right guys. And so far, so good for Les Snead and Sean McVay. And Matthew Stafford clearly is a critical part of that. Jared Goff had success in that system. Not nearly the success, not nearly as quickly as we saw Matthew Stafford and co. do it last year.
Ryan Wilson and Tyler Sullivan of CBS Sports, thank you guys so very much. And the podcast was actually mentioned, the Pick Six podcast. For much more on the NFL, it's the Daily NFL Fix, the Pick Six podcast with Will Brinson. Download it and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.